Please stay tuned to order. To order, call toll-free 1-800-257-1257 to save all COD charges and pay only $19.98 for records or cassettes or $24.98 for CDs, plus $4 shipping. Use your credit card or send check or money order to Slow Dancing, P.O. Box 8250, Atlanta, Georgia. Remember, save COD charges by sending check or money order or use your credit card.
This is CNN.
The following is a CNN special.
Welcome to our coverage of France's vote on the Maastricht Treaty on European Union. I'm Hilary Bowker in Paris. France has come to the close of an intense debate on its future in Europe. That debate ended in a national referendum on the Maastricht Treaty, which sets out a plan for a more closely united Europe. The result? France endorsed the Maastricht Treaty, but just barely. A preliminary final count shows the treaty was backed by 51% of French voters. It was rejected by 49%. That figure does not include votes from the French overseas territories. European governments had a positive but cautious reaction to the outcome of the referendum. And if the figures say anything about France's enthusiasm for a closer Europe, they speak less of a fiery passion than a lukewarm curiosity. In the land where we means yes, when it comes to Maastricht, yes apparently means something closer to maybe. CNN's Rick Salinger joins us live now here in Paris for a look at the French vote.
The people of France have spoken, and apparently what they've said is, we'll buy it, but we're not crazy about it. And already there is talk of going back to the drawing board. But the important thing is they did say yes, and so these plans for European unity can proceed.
The Eiffel Tower still stands. So does the Arc de Triomphe. The French did not cause an earthquake, as some had predicted. Newspapers carried one-word headlines, oui. Not a big yes, un petit oui. A little yes to Maastricht, just about 51% voting in favor of the treaty. At the ruling Socialist Party headquarters, the celebrations are now giving way to reality. President Mitterrand had survived the gamble, but must now face the fact that only half of his country wants Maastricht.
I am happy, my fellow countrymen, that you have chosen youth, renewal, the safeguarding of the present, which demands of you so much effort, and the opportunities, all those opportunities for tomorrow.
He had a tiny, tiny little yes, but it was a yes for Europe.
The No campaign tried to make it a referendum, not only on Maastricht, but Mitterrand as well. It is dismantling after its loss, but is claiming victory just the same.
Soviet treaty is nearly dead. I hope that British people, British Parliament and the Germans too will kill it, definitely.
The yes vote met a quiet day at the Bourse, the Paris Stock Exchange. There had been fear of turmoil if the vote was no. But that turmoil came a week early on the money markets. At the Café L'Amboisie, customers sipped their coffee and talked of a united Europe.
I think the only way of going out of the mess we are in just now is it's a European way.
I think it's very good for France because I think it's necessary to build Europe.
It was a much closer vote than those in the yes camp would have liked.
We are in democracy, and even if the difference is very small, it's the majority.
Denmark's voters earlier voted no. France's vote was seen as critical.
Because the vote was so close, the French President François Mitterrand will meet here with the German Chancellor Helmut Kohl in what's been described as urgent talks to discuss new initiatives to try and relaunch the drive for European unity. Hillary?
If France had voted the treaty down, it probably would have died then and there. But European unity would not have ended. It's already established under the Treaty of Rome from 1957. It first spelled out a plan for a united Europe. CNN's Rob Reynolds has this report on reaction across Europe to the French vote on the Maastricht Treaty.
The Maastricht Treaty has won a last-minute reprieve from its sentence of death by referendum, but it's still deeply unpopular among many Europeans. And that's a problem European leaders will now try to fix.
We do have to take account in public debate of many of the concerns that have been raised throughout the community over recent weeks. In the light of all that, I propose to call a special European Council of Heads of Government in early October to consider those issues.
Analysts say until now, the politicians have taken their people for granted.
We should bring people along with us, explain things, and John Major's rather good at that. I hope he'll do it here.
Major and his colleagues have a lot of explaining to do.
What do you think of the Maastricht Treaty?
I'd like to hear a bit more about it so that I could actually make an informed judgment. At the moment, I've not heard anything from anywhere.
I'm really not convinced that the British public knows in specific terms what it's all about.
I'll be honest, I don't even understand it. What I can make out of it is a waste of time.
Experts say big changes in the treaty are out of the question.
There will be no major renegotiation of the treaty. All the governments have ruled out any substantial renegotiation. What they're looking at is perhaps amending certain parts of it by means of a protocol to deal specifically with the Danish problem.
Denmark is the only one of the 12 EC countries to have rejected the treaty, though the government there wants the voters to reconsider. Ireland and France have ratified it through popular votes, Greece and Luxembourg through parliamentary action. 6 other countries are expected to approve Maastricht this year, but there's a big question mark hanging over Britain. A new poll shows British voters would reject the treaty by a margin of 2-1. A French-style referendum is not in the cards here, but rebellious members of John Major's Conservative Party promise a fight in Parliament.
I'm quite certain that if the present bill were presented with the present treaty, that it would have considerable trouble if it got back to the House of Commons.
Major won't submit the treaty to Parliament until Denmark indicates what it will do. Other nations are growing tired of British hesitation.
Nobody has been treated as specially as Britain has been treated in Maastricht. There's a special treatment for Great Britain. So please now show the flag of Nelson's. Everybody has to do his duty.
Relations between Britain and Germany are especially strained in the wake of last week's turmoil in the money markets. On Monday, those markets were calm, and trading was near normal. But while the French yes cooled some of the fever on the currency exchanges, the heat is still on for European politicians. Rob Reynolds, CNN, London.
In the United States, President George Bush called the vote here a positive development. In his words, it's a step toward integration that we have long supported. We'll be continuing with our coverage of the French referendum on Maastricht just ahead. Stay with us.
Who are you going to call the most this month?
My grandparents in Philippines.
My uncle, Supermaniam, who lives in Agra, India.
With Sprint's new program, The Most, you automatically save 20% off whoever you call the most each month.
I call Wim in the Netherlands.
And with The Most, you can also choose a plan that lets you save 20% on international calls.
A mom in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. My sister in Munich.
My sister in Sri Lanka.
Doesn't anyone have relatives in Buffalo anymore?
Oh, here are all the graduations. There's your sister in college.
Oh, yeah.
And there's Michael.
Hey, that's me in grammar school. Mom, how did you and Dad do it? I mean, you put 4 kids through college.
Your dad and I did a smart thing a long time ago.
Since 1928, families have invested with Scudder, America's first family of no-load funds.
Usually, when you send flowers out of town, you give the order to somebody who takes a cut. Then he passes the order to somebody else who takes a cut. But now there's Flowers Direct that actually lets you speak to a florist in the area where you're sending the flowers. Flowers Direct. Or We Cut is the middleman. Call Flowers Direct now, 1-800-621-2121.
It's an event 78 million Americans will celebrate. Never before has one birthday meant so much to so many. The generation told not to trust anyone over 30 is turning 50. Is America's midlife crisis about to begin? A look at the challenges facing America. Coming of Age, beginning today on Early Prime, 4 p.m. Eastern on CNN.
As we told you earlier, France has approved the Maastricht Treaty on European Union. Preliminary final results show a pretty close vote, though. 51% said yes, 49% said no. To discuss France's uneasy yes to the Maastricht Treaty and what it could mean for Europe, we're joined by Dominique Moisy. He's a political analyst with the Institut Français des Relations Internationales here in Paris. Monsieur Moisy, thank you very much for joining us. What next for France and for Europe?
Well, I think first you have to realize that, of course, it was a very small majority. But in a way, it's remarkable how mature or responsible the French people have been. If you consider the unpopularity of the president, the rejection of the political establishment, the high level of unemployment, the diffidence towards everything that is established in France. In spite of all of that, we've said yes.
Well, in spite of all of it, you've said yes, but it still is a very narrow yes. And it really, I mean, originally this referendum was designed to sort of revive the European spirit, as it were. It really hasn't done that, has it?
No, but it allows Europe to go on. I think a no would have been an earthquake, so to speak. A yes, even a very small yes, is not reassuring completely, I agree. There's no reason to be triumphant. But things go on. The treaty has been ratified by France. No, we passed the bucket, so to speak, to the British. What will they do with it?
Well, what do you think they will do with it?
Well, I don't know. It's clear, if you look at polls in Great Britain, that the British, in their majority, are not necessarily against Europe, but they are clearly against Maastricht.
Well, Britain has already said that it's not going to go ahead with this until the Danish question is resolved. Now, Denmark's taking over the presidency of the European Community in the end of the year.
Should take the presidency.
Is expected to.
Is expected to. Well, I think John Major has a major problem in front of him, and he has to decide, where is England? I mean, the British have always had a special relationship to Europe. They came much later, and partly because of us, because General de Gaulle didn't want them to join. No, they have to settle. The fate of Europe is in their hand. If they don't want to join, well, we're back to the Franco-German special relationship. Is that what the British want?
Well, just going back to what the British want and going back to what happened to Britain in terms of its currency last week, a number of analysts have now said that given the state of the currencies, that even if there is some advance, what we're going to be looking at here now is in fact a two-stage Europe. Do you think that is a...
In a way, yes. In fact, we have a two-speed France, the confident and the fearful, those who are happy, those who are not. The happy have said yes, the unhappy have said no.
The rich and the poor you're talking about here.
The rich and the poor. And we have a two-speed Europe.
Well, what do we do about the poorer countries? I mean, how can this be resolved right now?
Well, there's a major difference. The unhappy one in France have said no to Europe. The poorest countries in Europe are saying yes to Europe because they realize that it is their only chance, it is their alternative. In fact, the poorer you are, the more you feel you need Europe. It's in Central and Eastern Europe. They were banking on the French yes, and they have the French yes.
Well, where do we go from here now, though? I mean, what about Germany? There is a very definite feeling in Germany that the public wants its chance now to say yes or no, to decide whether or not this treaty should go forward. Chancellor Kohl doesn't seem terribly keen on a referendum just yet, but do you think he's going to be forced to go to the people?
He may be forced to, and I think the result might be exactly the same as France, which would reinforce in some ways the similarities between the two countries. And the poor would be more in the east, the rich in the west, of course, but I think there would be a slim majority in Germany too, for Europe. Because in both countries, we don't see any alternative to the continuation of the process.
But do you believe that people who no longer remember the war, who no longer remember what Europe went through, really, first of all, appreciate what 35 years of negotiation instead of fighting has done, and really feel that it can make a positive change to their lives?
I think yes. In fact, you mentioned World War II. I would mention also the Cold War. The Cold War is over. We don't have the Soviet Union as a threat, as a reason to unite ourselves. And I think one of the reasons of the destabilization in Western Europe is precisely the disappearance of the enemy. We are alone with ourselves, and still there is a feeling that we have a responsibility towards our children, and that unique responsibility is to build Europe. I mean, a lot of people were going to say no, and at the last minute, they didn't dare to do so.
Because of the future?
Because of the future.
Well, you mentioned the Cold War. Is there not also the problem that perhaps European leaders are still psychologically in the Cold War in terms of the way that they advance towards more integration, that they've got to start opening it up now?
I think you're right. The Maastricht Treaty was the last act of a Europe conceived during the time of the Cold War. We have to take seriously the change. We have to integrate the call of the French people, which was a relief, but also very strongly a warning. It's not enough to do Europe for the people. We have to do it with the people.
All right, thank you very much for joining us. Dominique Moisy was a political analyst here in Paris. Now, the German government had a big stake in the outcome of the vote here. It's been firmly behind the plan for a closer Europe. But as CNN's Doug James reports, Maastricht would have mixed results for the German people.
Oui or ja, it all means yes. As they returned to work Monday morning, most Germans were relieved that French voters did not scuttle the Maastricht Treaty.
A majority decided for Europe, and I'm glad. But in the future, we won't have a choice but to work together.
But many wished it had received more solid support.
I'm not really happy because it was almost a tie, because it wasn't a clear result. So overall, it's not really an enthusiastic result for Europe.
German opposition leaders found their own way to thank French voters, as did Chancellor Helmut Kohl.
It's a close result, but nevertheless a result that says yes.
Kohl had joined with French President François Mitterrand in staking his political reputation on the success of Maastricht. Despite that success, he still has a tough job ahead. German business leaders expressed relief at the outcome, but serious doubts about the future.
I would have preferred a more clear decision, either pro or con, but that didn't happen. So now Europe will keep trudging along until it meets another hurdle.
These business students watched the markets anxiously, but their teacher said few really understand the issues.
There are certainly a lot of issues which have to be explained better, especially if they want us to make us enthusiastic about Maastricht and motivate us towards European unity.
While most Germans support European unity, there's growing discontent here over the idea of a common currency, which many fear could weaken the powerful Deutschmark. Chancellor Kohl says this and other issues will have to be addressed.
We will have to discuss the doubts about Maastricht and Europe's future. Doubts that exist not only in Denmark and France, but also here in Germany and other countries.
Opinion polls show 80% of Germans want their own referendum on Maastricht. But even though Kohl himself admits politicians generally haven't done a very good job in selling the treaty to the public, he'll be sending it directly to Parliament for ratification. Already in the history books as the chief architect of German unity, Chancellor Kohl clearly doesn't want to risk his future as one of the founding fathers of European unity. Doug James, CNN, Berlin.
No. Our coverage of the French vote on the European Union will continue after these messages. We'll be talking to our community correspondent, Patricia Kelly. Stay with us.
Year
Year after year, Sears brings you one beautiful wish book after another. It's always a favorite for hassle-free holiday shopping right from your home with our 24-hour order line. And this special new wish kit is an exclusive TV offer. You get the wish book for just $4, plus a $5 certificate toward purchase and this brand new telephone free. Shop over 2,000 toys, games, and sporting goods, apparel, jewelry, electronics, great values like this. Please a budding designer with Color Stitch Lock Stitch, the perfect first sewing machine. Kids love the battery-powered Mickey Mobile, featuring a realistic dash and CD mic. Shopping by phone with our trained consultants is like having a friend to help, and we'll deliver right to you. To receive this special offer, call 1-800-225-3300 for rush delivery. For a $4 charge to your credit card, we'll send you a free telephone and the $5 certificate along with your wish book. For rush delivery, call 1-800-225-3300.
Hey, Dad, that's Mackerel Cove.
Yep.
I haven't thought of that place in years.
Well, we have. Your mom and I are going to build a summer house there.
But you'd save all year just to go there for a week. And now you're going to build a house there?
Well, the truth is, we started building it a long time ago.
Since 1928, families have invested with Scudder, America's first family of no-load funds.
I've got a 6 a.m. flight. I've got to get some Z's.
Nitol safely helps you fall asleep fast so you can get your Z's. Nitol or maximum strength Nitol.
Nitol will help you get your Z's.
You scum! I want you out of my life. Soap scum's disgusting. That's why I use X14 soap scum remover. X14 is made to get rid of slimy soap scum without scrubbing. Try X14 soap scum remover.
The road to a closer Europe is by no means clearly marked in the wake of the French vote, and it could yet lead to a dead end. To discuss the treaty and where Europe goes from here, we're joined now in Paris by CNN's Brussels correspondent, Patricia Kelly. So, Patricia, whence the community from here?
Well, as far as the Maastricht Treaty is concerned, Hillary, it's all but dead. This French vote, although it was a yes vote, was so narrow that it really doesn't advance the treaty itself much further. The community still has to get Denmark back on board, and right up until now, the politicians haven't got a clue how they're going to be able to do that.
Well, if they haven't got a clue, Patricia, are there any sort of mechanisms that they can use to work forward, or are they just going to have to try and take Maastricht back to the drawing board?
Well, they originally said that if France voted no, then that would be the end of Maastricht. But when Denmark voted no, they reckoned that they could go ahead with 11 countries and one alongside. But in fact, they can't do that. The treaty states very clearly that it cannot come into force without all 12 countries. So in fact, it will have to go back to the drawing board. Denmark can hardly go back to the country in another referendum. It would rather be like telling a naughty child, you didn't give us the right answer that time, we're going to ask you again.
Well, at this stage also, do you think that Britain is going to, I mean, we've talked about this already, but do you think Britain is going to be forced to a referendum, or do you think the Danish no is sort of going to save their skin, as it were?
Well, John Major has made it clear up until now that he is not going to put that treaty through the British Parliament until a solution is found for Denmark. So in fact, he's going to try and wait until the Danish problem is sorted out. They could go on like this for quite some time.
Now, Patricia, I mean, last week we saw in the financial markets this incredible chaos, and there was a lot of British recrimination towards the German Bundesbank. Do you think now that a mood for cooperation can be recreated, or do you think it's going to be very difficult?
Well, there is already cooperation between European countries, Hillary. The Maastricht Treaty was just taking them further down the road towards a kind of United States of Europe. It's not going to hurt very much if that happens a bit later rather than sooner. And I think most countries realize that. It's going to be put on hold for a while, I think. But in the end, I'm pretty sure something will come of it, but it just might take that bit longer.
Well, do you think, Patricia, that given what we were talking about earlier, this chaos in the markets last year, that there will be a way to sort of, do you think that they will have to put some of the fundamental themes in Maastricht, do you think they're going to just have to tone them down a little bit, or are they going to, I mean, just what do you think they can do?
Well, they can carry on as they have up until now. The single market will most certainly go ahead. I would have thought that certain aspects of it, VAT harmonization and tax harmonization, may take a little bit longer, but the European community isn't going to come to a standstill. It's going to be rolling on. As far as foreign and defense policy is concerned, there is already a great deal of cooperation between European countries. Maastricht was only giving them the opportunity to take that a bit further, but what they've been doing up until now vis-a-vis outside relations with the rest of the world, that has to go on. Things won't stop overnight. It just means that this treaty will not come into effect until all countries are on board, so they're going to have to sort something out. But the European community will carry on. It can't stop.
Patricia, you mentioned the single market, which does go into effect come January. Do you believe that some of the people voting in this referendum were confusing Maastricht with the single market?
I'm sorry, Hillary, I didn't quite get that question.
What I was saying was, do you think that perhaps some of the voters in this referendum here in France were confusing parts of the single market with the Maastricht Treaty?
I think there was a lot of confusion in France about the vote, and various people voted for different reasons. Yes, there are certain things under the single market that have already come into place, that are already happening in France, that will happen in the future, that people are blaming on the Maastricht Treaty. But I think really the Maastricht Treaty itself wasn't at stake in this referendum. I think what was happening in France, and indeed what has been happening all over Europe, is an anger, a certain anger with the politicians and the bureaucrats about decisions being made behind closed doors, about bureaucrats taking over their life. Now, if you talk to the European Commission, to the bureaucrats themselves, they deny this. They say that they don't make the decisions, they just put them forward. It's political ministers, it's politicians from the individual countries that make those decisions. And what has happened in France, as in other countries, for years the politicians, every time something's gone wrong domestically, they've blamed Brussels and the bureaucrats, and it's backfired because now the people believe them.
All right, thank you very much. CNN's Patricia Kelly was joining us here in Paris. Now, the world's financial markets reacted to the French vote. In Frankfurt, German shares dropped, reflecting disappointment that the treaty was not backed by a wider margin. London shares moved up and down as the market anticipated a cut in British interest rates. And here in Paris, the low measure of support for Maastricht pushed leading shares lower. Still ahead, what the papers had to say, views on Maastricht from Europe's press. Stay with us.
Hollywood Pictures and Miramax Films present Whoopi Goldberg as an extraordinary teacher.
Isn't history beautiful? Yeah!
To her students, she's outrageous.
Yes, I like it.
To the authorities, she's dangerous.
People can defeat the armies.
But to a young girl named Serafina,
what do you want?
She's an inspiration.
Freedom. Freedom is just the beginning. Think bigger.
Whoopi Goldberg and Laletti Kamalo, Serafina, rated PG-13, now playing in select cities. Starts Friday.
Wow, you guys look great.
Oh, we were so young back then.
Mom, was it any easier when you got married?
No, but we pulled together, just like the two of you will.
We're not starting out with very much.
We didn't either, but we saved, and we invested.
Since 1928, families have invested with Scudder, America's first family of no-load funds.
That's life.
You guys around next week?
Not me. I'm off to State College on Saturday.
You're still going? That's great.
What about your dad's surgery?
Yeah, the bills and stuff.
No problem. He had some extra insurance to help pick up the bills.
Aflac Supplemental Insurance helps close the gaps in your health insurance, like deductibles and co-payments. Aflac lets life go right on, and that's the peace of mind you want. Aflac, insuring over 35 million people worldwide.
40 years ago, the American dream meant prosperity and opportunity. Today, most people feel that dream is slipping away. CNN presents an honest look at this country's economic future. Pillars of Our Prosperity, Sunday, 10 Eastern on CNN.
While Europe's leaders took the optimistic view of France's narrow approval of Maastricht, European newspapers saw a different side to the story. An editorial in Germany's Süddeutsche Zeitung said a serious crisis in the European currency system remains. British reservations remain. Mitterrand's illness remains. The Norwegian paper Dagbladet noted that the very narrow majority shows that the Maastricht Treaty has less confidence than it has to have if such extensive plans are to be implemented. And Portugal's Público newspaper cautioned that a few months ago, a gradual march towards a more or less united Europe seemed irreversible. But today, there is a question mark over Europe. And that concludes our coverage of the French referendum on the Maastricht Treaty. I'm Hilary Bowker in Paris.
International Hour continues, followed by Early Prime after this local commercial break. Next on CNN.
Boo. Hey, TNT. Remember when there were still a few good Krakens slithering around? When it wasn't such a big deal to see a Griffin fighting a Cyclops? Well, forget today's special effects. I demand justice! Get back to the real stuff from the master of dynamation, Ray Harryhausen, when Monster Vision brings you a whole night of his mythical masterpieces. Hooray for Harryhausen! Saturday, beginning at 8 on TNT.
Where can you use the Players Club card? Las Vegas, Atlantic City, the Caribbean, on cruise ships. Sometimes you just need to get away from it, all right? But these days, you gotta be smart about it. With a Players Club card, you save 50% off your room, 25% off food and drinks, up to 50% off shows. The Players Club card. Have some fun the smart way.
New members get 2 free nights in Las Vegas or Atlantic City when the club books their flights. Call toll-free right now. There's no obligation.
This is CNN.
Good evening from London. I'm Jim Clancy.
Good afternoon from Washington. I'm David French in for Frank Sesno, and welcome to an abbreviated version of the International Hour.
Ahead, the Paris newspapers tell the story. French voters say yes to Maastricht, but just barely. What does yesterday's vote mean for European unity?
Also, the struggle to get food and supplies into Sarajevo.
The airlift may resume later this week, but evidence of the dangers involved is everywhere. The road to the airport is littered with debris from recent heavy fighting.
CNN's Christian Amanpour on the critical shortages in the Bosnian capital.
It appears the European community intends to press ahead with ratification of the Maastricht Treaty on European Union. French Foreign Minister Roland Dumas says most EC members oppose renegotiating the treaty after yesterday's close vote in France. The final tally shows French voters approved the Maastricht Treaty by the slimmest of margins, about 51% to 49%. Paris newspapers proclaim victory for the yes forces, but only a partial victory. The narrow margins have raised new questions about the viability of political and economic integration in Europe.
It's not my impression that the pressure is very strong, but after the last 2 weeks' turbulences, a lot of positions have to be settled or resettled. So I think after 2 or 3 days, we will see that the markets will begin to work in a more orderly fashion.
French President Francois Mitterrand and German Chancellor Helmut Kohl have scheduled an urgent meeting tomorrow to discuss new initiatives for European Union.
Now for a check on how the U.S. markets are doing, let's check in with Terry Keenan at the New York Stock Exchange. Terry.
Thanks, David. The French approval of the Maastricht Treaty did nothing for stocks here on Wall Street. They're lower across the board, pressured by lower bond prices. Right now, the Dow Jones Industrials are off about 12.75 points at 33.14. Big board volume is moderate, with 138 million shares traded so far. The other key indexes are also lower. Maastricht did help push stocks up in London, but the rally didn't last. Hopes faded for another cut in interest rates, and so did the rally. The FT 100 closed with a loss of 7 points at 25.60. Stocks on the European continent ended the day mixed. In Paris, the CAC 40 dropped more than 3%. Frankfurt's DAX index lost nearly 1%, but a rally in Milan helped push the MIB index up 1.33%. And finally, there is still some volatility in the currency markets today. The dollar continues to climb against the battered British pound. Right now, it is up another 3 1/3 cents, but it is down 1 3/4 pfennigs against the mark and 3/4 of a yen lower against the Japanese currency. And a final check of the big board shows the Dow off about 12 points. We'll be back in 1 hour with all the closing numbers. I'm Terry Keenan, reporting live from the New York Stock Exchange.
Thank you, Terry. Coming up on the International Hour, President Bush urges the United Nations to expand its peacekeeping efforts. We'll have a live report from Ralph Begleiter at the UN.
And the latest on Sarajevo, struggling to feed the hungry with what little food is left.
Who are you going to call the most this month?
My grandparents in Philippines.
My uncle, Subramaniam, who lives in Agra, India.
With Sprint's new program, The Most, you automatically save 20% off whoever you call the most each month.
I call